Season 2, Episode 3.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to UX Podcast, coming to you from Stockholm, Sweden. We are your hosts, Per Axbom
and James Roy Lawson.
Balancing business, technology, people, and society with listeners all over the world, from Ecuador to South Korea.
And today we have for you a link show.
Yay!
But this is season 2 now, and we've got new theme tunes and stuff. So I thought I'd do as a little link show jingle. Do you want to hear it?
Link show jingle.
Yeah. Do you want to hear it? Play
the jingle, James.
Okay, here's what I've done. It's a link show.
So this is what you've been working on.
Oh, yeah. I spent all my holiday producing that little clip there.
Wonderful.
Oh, dear. But anyway, so a link show, what this is where Per and I, we have collected or picked 2 articles that we've read and that we think is interesting, inspiring, or conversation sparking, and we're going to walk you through them and talk about them in today's episode.
And what I love about these shows is that we pick articles and they are rarely directly related or on the same topic, but we manage to connect them in a way that creates something new and interesting.
Or maybe there's just some kind of hidden bias somewhere that we don't really realize that's happening.
We're just really smart, James.
Clearly that. So the 2 articles we've got for you today. The first one is Frugal Computing, a developer perspective. And this is by Wim Vanderbauwhede.
Oh, well done pronouncing that.
Thank you. I've no idea if it's right, but I try.
And what does frugal mean, James?
Frugal basically means being conservative with the use of something, or reducing how much you use of something. Often you'd use frugal in connection with money. You'd be frugal with your money. You wouldn't spend very much.
Yeah. And the second article is CSS and Accessibility Inclusion Through User Choice. And that's by Carie Fisher on Smashing Magazine. We'll be talking a bit about how you can use CSS media features to give users more options based on things like, well, I'll get to that actually. Ha!
To be honest, both of these articles sound quite developer-related and technical.
Yes, they do.
But, bear with us. We'll hold your hand. First up, Frugal Computing by Wim Vanderbauwhede, who is the Professor of Computing Science at Glasgow University in the UK, where he is the lead of the Low Carbon and Sustainable Computing activity.
Yeah.
Now, even though the article I've chosen is the developer perspective article, it's a follow-up to one he wrote previously called just Frugal Computing. I think originally these 2 articles were from 21 or 22, 2021, but he's updated them a couple of times since, and they're still thoroughly relevant. But both articles share the same intro. He outlines the problem space and outlines suggested solutions in a similar way in both of them. So read both the articles. Well, the one I've chosen is the developer perspective one, because it actually has actions to take. Now, you may be thinking, yes, developer actions to take, but we know how it is when we work with developers. It's a team game and so on, and many of the things the developers do, maybe we can help influence them, or in some ways I think our design decisions are part of that anyway. So
and we need to understand all the options and possibilities and what we can do to actually reach our goals, and one of those goals may actually be to reduce energy.
Yeah. So I'm going to, first off, In Frugal computing, Wim, he lays out the need for low carbon and sustainable computing, and that's a proposed solution. But first off, he outlines the main problem areas in frugal computing, or rather with the emissions that come from our lack of being frugal. One of which is emissions from computing are 2% of global emissions. I believe these are the 2021 figures. But they're expected to rise really steeply, which isn't really surprising, I suppose, when you think about the computing power needed for large language models and all the AIs and so on, and video streaming.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the numbers are so large. I've been reading up on this as well, and when you hear that number, it may not tell you much when you say 2% or even 2.4% of the world, but that is the same amount that is produced by cars, the carbon emissions from cars globally. So that the data centers are emitting the same amount of carbon.
Huh. I'll quote here from Wim. By 2040, emissions from computing alone will be more than half the emissions level acceptable to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. I mean, we're not that far away from 2040, and that's quite a staggering thing. If that computing alone will be half the emissions. I mean, I've not double checked how that figure's been calculated, but to be honest, I'm not really so worried in that. It's going to be massive. We can't avoid the fact it's going to be massive, or rather, we maybe can avoid the being massive.
At the same time as new technology is like AI and machine learning is actually making us use even more energy.
Yeah. So the other way Wim says emissions is problematic, or computing is problematic within emissions, is the production of the devices themselves. And the emissions from producing the devices is actually, it far exceeds the emissions from using them. So Wim says, so even if the devices are more energy efficient, producing more of them will make the emissions problems worse. Therefore, we must extend the useful life of our computing devices.
Yeah. And that's something a lot of people don't think about, actually, I believe, is that you produce something that is more energy efficient, yet to produce that, you actually made things worse.
Yeah, it's that kind of the sunk investments, the investment you make in making something better sometimes can be way much better than just making the existing thing slightly better. So his high-level solution, this is from the first article about frugal computing. The high-level solution, he says, is creating a society. Sorry, as a society, we need to start treating computational resources as finite and precious, to be utilised only when necessary and as effectively as possible. We need frugal computing, achieving the same results for less energy. That was one of the original one, and then in the developer perspective article, he goes on to propose 5 actions for developers to take. And I think you'll when I read these 5 out, that you get what I mean about how, or you start to get what I mean. That I think developers, designers, whatever, all of us who work in the digital space, they're not exclusively developer things. So here's the 5. Make software that works on older devices. The older, the better. Make software that will keep on working for a very long time. Make software that uses the least amount of total energy to achieve its results. Make software that also uses the least amount of network data transfer, memory, and storage. And make software that encourages the user to use it in a frugal way. Before we say anything else, he says software the whole time here.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want people to get hung up on the word software, because for me, that just means app, website, digital thing, widget.
Everything is software these days.
Yeah, I mean, we get it.
Yeah. I have to say, as you're reading these, but this story comes to mind, and because when I first met my mother-in-law, she was doing bookkeeping for my father-in-law, and she did this on software loaded from a 3.5-inch floppy disk directly from an MS-DOS prompt. So it was all like white text on a black background. And from my perspective, it was ancient, and she was doing this for years. But of course, for all intents and purposes, the software worked for her. The way she did bookkeeping didn't change. So it was always the same, and she didn't have to learn anything new. But I wasn't thinking about, at the time, the environmental benefits of this, because this is a perfect example of what he's suggesting in this article. Just make it work for a very long time.
Yeah, it's definitely something really interesting to think about. I mean, that is one of the thing that comes up a lot. That if something feels, we see it in usability testing or in observations and studies and so on, that if a device feels sluggish, it doesn't respond quick enough, then people get frustrated. It worsens the user experience, and one of the consequences that, apart from the fact maybe they don't use your service or don't, buy the thing from your website or sign up or whatever it is, a more holistic consequence is they start thinking of upgrading their device.
Yeah.
Oh God, no! It's like everything's so slow. I need to get a new iPhone. I need to, get a new mobile. I need to get a new laptop. And just as your story says, these devices aren't obsolete. They aren't useless. They're just not got the capacity to do the demanding things that websites, apps, software is demanding of them.
The fancy stuff, the things that I guess we argue that we are trying to improve the user experience by adding motion and adding cool interactive features that aren't always necessary, but we include them because we can argue for their marketing. They help in marketing, and they help in people actually accepting your product because you're showing them something new and exciting, which is perhaps something that is more appealing. But you could still accomplish the exact same thing if you think about the user goal with much less of that fancy interactive features.
That actually makes me think about a topic that's been in the media recently is how fashion trends at the moment have been for oversized clothes, baggy clothing. And what we've seen recently is that the amount of waste related to clothing is increasing, or the amount of resources and also the amount of waste has been increasing recently because of that trend. Rather than having a trend where clothes fit, the trend is now oversized clothes. So using more resources than you need because of a trend.
Oh, that's so fascinating. So,
thinking about that as well in the relation to web design or app design or digital design, that, I think now it's over 10 years ago, I wrote an article about sliding banners, carousels, and dissing them, dismissing them and saying we shouldn't be using them. And I listed quite a number of points of why you shouldn't be using them. One of which, and the main one, of course, is that people never saw the second or third picture on these banners. So they were pointless in that sense. But at the end of the article, I half jokingly said they damage the environment.
Yeah.
10 years ago, I was half joking. Looking back at the article, I'm not joking at all.
No, you're right.
I was actually right, but it was a point that was really quite relevant. Just I guess I joked about it because 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been a serious point. It wouldn't have been taken seriously.
Right.
But that was a trend. The banners, those sliding banners and carousels, was a trend, and it made my laptop fan go crazy at the time. So it was clearly using more power. So it was a trend that caused environmental damage.
Exactly. And I think images, if we're speaking from a designer perspective now, images is one of those areas where you can do so much difference by just selecting a different image format and making sure that you have the size. You don't need a bigger image than is needed for the interface that you're designing. But some people, I see this so often, they always take the highest quality image, and that is what they want online because it looks the best on their particular screens.
And there, though, then we know there's several ways to reduce the quality of images without having any reduce the size of images without reducing the quality of them.
Exactly.
And I know that we've been talking about WebP format as a way of reducing them. That is becoming more very widely supported. Another way there is that you maybe don't need to use multiple versions of the same image. It's always been quite standard that you just crop something a different way or you clip something a different way, and you end up with 5 or 6 images that are effectively the same. They're just made for different situations. You can actually developers anyway. They can use CSS to position things from one image.
Exactly.
So you could actually have one core image and then make it reused in all these situations. So you don't need to download several resources.
So you don't need to store that many images.
Store them, download them,
exactly.
Cache them, all those kind of things. So that's definitely something to look into. And the point about video too, that video is just a series of images. So Wim says that one of the things that impacts data transfer, storage, the environment is streaming video.
Yeah.
And if you, for example, can reduce the quality or the streaming bitrate of your videos, then it makes a substantial difference to how much they're contributing to emissions. I'd like to add there as well that things such as not playing things automatically,
exactly,
and lazy loading. That these are kind of things that you maybe could encourage your developers to look at making sure is the case, so you don't unnecessarily get something ready for playing. I mean, we always say things, you don't want the video to lag and all the rest of it, but maybe you just don't want the video to play automatically full stop.
But I think the hardest part of this is specifically make it work for a long time on older computers, because we are always asking our users to upgrade. I mean, you and I used to design for Internet Explorer 6 back in the day, and people hate that browser, so we want to move away from it. So we were asking people to upgrade, move browsers, and new features pop up, and new ways of writing HTML and CSS pop up, and you need to upgrade your browsers. You're always being asked to have the latest version. Even on your phones, you need to upgrade your operating system to be able to download the latest apps.
I think this is one of those really difficult conversations in teams. Is that there's often a push for the latest trends. You get pushed back as well when saying, well, it works on the latest iPhones, or like you said about Internet Explorers, it works on Edge, so I don't need to worry about an older one. And I know that me and you have celebrated the death of Internet Explorer 6 because it was really hard work to work with, but. Which is maybe not quite the same thing as making sure it works on older devices. Older browsers is a slightly different thing, I guess. But those conversations are difficult in your team. It's like, how do you convince them that we should be trying to make something work on like an iPhone 4, not just an iPhone. Well, we are now 14, 15. I've lost track.
14,
yeah. I mean that's a tough conversation. Well, what do you do, Per? What do you say?
I mean, you need to start the conversations by having examples like this and put them out there and discuss it, and because we need to be open about it and the consequences of what we're doing, because we are contributing to this. We are making things. We are making stuff, which means that we are part of the problem unless we're also addressing the problem.
Yeah, I was thinking as well about there's a number of tools that are available to estimate your carbon footprint of especially websites, which might be a useful tool to have in the conversations. I mean, we talked about page speed before and so on, but showing how much of a carbon footprint your page has and maybe how much bigger it is than a competitor's, maybe. That might be something that you could utilize in conversations. I wonder as well.
You need to be proud of low energy use. It needs to be something that people show that we're doing this, so that people start talking about it.
I think maybe as well as consumers, we maybe should start demanding it. and this is a little bit of a segue into the next article, but maybe it'd be good if I had the ability to communicate to a website that I preferred low emissions.
Yeah.
And if I could flag, look, give me the low emission version of your website from the off, then just like you would, we used to have do not track was a thing that you could say I don't want to be tracked on that never really took off. But there's other ways of media features that we'll get into in the next article. But if I could signal that to the website, or even like we have dark mode and so on, you can say less use of data, less use of this, and that would be good for the environment.
Yeah, make it more transparent. So you almost teased the next article, James. I love how that actually moves us on to this concept of CSS media features. So this article by Carie Fisher in Smashing Magazine, it's entitled CSS and Accessibility, Inclusion Through User Choice. And Carie is a freelance accessibility and UX consultant. So in this article, from an accessibility perspective, Carie is arguing that we need to give users more choice. And she has some examples in the introduction to her article about how many different choices we make each day, and we actually feel autonomous and in control of our lives. And it's funny because she has this example of now, today, when you're a web developer and a web designer, you have access to over 650,000 web fonts and a hexadecimal system capable of representing 16,777,216 colors. And that number is so interesting because when you and I started out, we had access to 216 colors.
Yeah, no. When we started out, when I started out, it was 16.
Oh, yeah, of course, yeah.
Actually, no, to be honest, it was probably 8, thinking about it. I mean, in some modes, it was 2.
Well, yeah, depending on how far we go back, it was monochrome. So
exactly, it was black and white. Yeah, so it's a very, very big number, Pat.
It's an extremely big number. I don't even understand why the number has to be that big. But so, well, this is great news for professional. I'm not sure it is, she writes. What choices are we giving the actual user? Shouldn't they have a say in their experience? And so while we may have some insights into user needs, it's challenging, she says, to understand the actual user preference of 7.8 billion people at any given time. So the benefit of this would be that if people can actually tell us what they want, we will be able to provide a better experience by giving them a voice. And that voice can be given now through CSS media features by listening to what the browsers and the user agents are asking for. And I think to understand this from a designer perspective, I think one aspect of CSS media features that you're familiar with are page width. So if a page is wide, content should be placed in one way, and if a page is narrow, like on a phone, it should be placed another way. And this is the foundation for responsive design. Mm-hmm. And what Carie Fisher is talking about in her article is that there are several more opportunities beyond this for adapting to user preference using CSS. And even if you're not a person, this is the same point that James was making before about being a developer and this being quite a technical article, is that even if you're not a person who actively codes the CSS, you should be aware of these so that you can cater to different user needs and know what conversations you should be having, because talking about these features actually makes you more aware of the types of different needs that are important to have in mind. And you don't actually need to always be implementing all of these that we're talking about today, but you need to be thinking about the needs that are causing people to request these types of issues, which are related to color, contrast, motion, and actually also to data and data download speeds, like we were talking about before.
Yeah, and I think though, as a designer, being aware that some of these media features are available or coming, maybe means that you can actually bake in some variance into your deliverables or into your what you're working on from the start. Because some of these things, when you're in the space dealing with something, it's kind of easier to make two variants than it is to go back and do a second variant, further down the line.
Exactly. So I think the first one that she mentions, relating to color, is one of the most popular and mostly used ones today. The prefers color scheme CSS media feature. It helps you identify whether users prefer light or dark color themes. So users can indicate this through settings in their operating system, but also sometimes you have a setting, like I know I have for my iPad, it actually changes my preference across the day. So at night, it will prefer the dark mode. And websites that have this turned on, I will actually get a dark color theme for that website.
This is actually interesting, Per, though, because what happens at least with this is it's a cascade of preferences. So you're taking a preference from the operating system level,
yes,
and it's then been fed down to the browser, and then the browser is communicating that to the code on our website, effectively.
Yeah.
So you're saying, on your telephone, for example, that I want it to be dark mode after sunset.
Yeah.
And then the telephone then in its browser says to the browser, this person now wants dark mode. And then the browser, when it's presenting the web page, it will check prefers color scheme and implement, when it's displaying the web page, it'll implement dark, the bits in that CSS that are relevant for dark. So
exactly.
It will look dark mode.
And and even I think I downloaded a theme at one point that had the dark mode. I didn't like the dark mode, so I disabled it. So essentially, you still have control as a designer, but you need to be aware that this exists. And people have this preference because a lot of people it's so much easier for them to read a dark mode. And they, of course, contrary to what I have, they maybe have it turned on all the time.
And prefers color scheme is really widely supported. I think it's 94% of browsers support it now, and a lot of websites do make use of it too, but a lot of them don't. And here we've got the whole testing thing. You can see when a designer hasn't been aware of dark mode when they've developed their sites, because sometimes it gets forced.
Exactly.
And but whether you define something or not, it can end up looking inverted or dark or anything. And your colours, if you haven't made a choice, then maybe the colours aren't quite optimal.
Well, that's a good point. If you don't make a choice, things may happen if you're not aware of all these things.
Design choice. If you don't make a design decision, then some of these things might be made for you.
Yeah. And I love that you used the word forced, because the other CSS media feature is actually forced colors.
Ah, look, yeah.
I thought that was an interesting one, because I'm not entirely sure how that would play out. So that's something I would want to test more with, because this does not strictly fit into the low or high contrast categories. It can, but it doesn't have to. It means that the color adjustments align with a user choice, that they in the browser can actually set their own preferred colors. And those will be forced into the website, which means that you can actually take that information and use it to set a new background based on if they are using their own colors.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about this one, how it would play out, like you say. And the article talks about how Windows does actually offer you the ability to make custom high contrast mode. I think is effectively what you can do to achieve a similar situation. But for what it sounds like, it's like you choose certain colours for certain situations.
Yeah,
and they will be used.
I would assume that one of those examples would clearly be that somebody wants all links to be blue and underlined, whatever you've designed.
Well, yeah, so I'm interested. That one I'm going to read more about, Per, because I don't see how. I'm not sure at the moment how we would deal with that. What I'm expected to do.
Exactly. And that's the interesting thing. That what I was alluding to in the beginning there is that if you're aware of this, you're aware that some people will actually want other colors on your website, and you have the ability to accommodate that. But whether you do it through this technology or some other technology, that's a design choice.
So you've got it prefers force colours.
Yeah, exactly.
So then you could actually... Oh, okay. I'm starting to think I understand a bit more about it. But it's a bit more tricky to understand that one compared to...
It is tricky to understand, yeah.
Dark mode, and compared to... if it's okay to move on to the next one.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Inverted colours.
Yeah.
See, that I have... that I can get my head around quite easily.
Exactly.
That it's the opposite.
Yeah. Yellow on black or black on yellow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is a quite common one, yeah.
But this gives the opportunity for you to adjust the opposite. Because, I mean, we've all been there. That you kind of... Sometimes when you invert something, the inverted combination doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't have quite the same feeling that you get from the original. So inverted colours allows you to just make those little adjustments that you do as a designer. Say, okay, no, I'll have that blue just slightly lighter, and feels better, fits better, maybe contrast-wise sits better. And in the inverted colours media CSS feature allows you to do that.
Exactly. Another aspect of CS or of the interface that people can have an opinion on and actually set in their browsers in some way, either by choice or by other circumstances in the operating system, is contrast. So if someone actually wants higher contrast, they will probably have set that in their operating system, and that can actually then also carry over to the browser in the similar ways that James was talking about before, which means that then this person prefers higher contrast, then I can provide a higher contrast mode.
What I didn't realise, Pat, was that the CSS media feature for contrast has less.
Oh yeah, that was really interesting. Less, more, and custom.
Because when we've been working on this before, often it's from an accessibility point of view, we've gone for high contrast mode because high contrast we know helps particular groups of people looking at the content. But I hadn't really considered the less contrast option. Do you know anything about, I shouldn't question of why it's useful, but is there any examples in particular of where that's a useful situation?
Again, it comes down to all these 7.8 billion people on our planet. And I think that some people will actually have trouble with too much contrast. And I have experienced this because sometimes I've wanted to design things with more contrast and people just protest and object to that because it makes them feel uncomfortable because it's too sharp. It's too much of something, and it's not always easy to articulate. But if you can say, I want less of that, in a way, in one of these CSS media features, that's fascinating because then you can actually accommodate people wanting it less. Because then you could have a default that is higher contrast, which accommodates a lot of people, and make the less one the one that is the secondary option.
Yeah. I mean, I guess in some ways maybe it's like, I mean, I don't like having my screens really, really bright, the brightness level really high. So I can imagine that in certain situations that I wouldn't mind toning down the contrast a bit. I mean, to be honest, we do a bit with text. I mean, we don't generally use black text on white.
Exactly, yeah.
We would generally have a dark grey because it is slightly, easier to read instead of...
or an off-white background.
Exactly, yeah. So you just reduce the contrast slightly to make it more readable for many people.
Yeah, or for the people who want it, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump over to the motion one because I find that this one is interesting. It relates a lot to our previous article because motion itself can be quite intensive for in terms of graphics and processors, which means that it can actually affect carbon emissions, depending on, of course, how many users you have and how popular your website is. But this is a choice. When you add motion to your website, whether it involves videos, GIFs, or SVGs, and you often do that because you think this makes the experience so much better, but it can also be a problem for a lot of people. So people with seizure disorders and migraine disorders, it can trigger all these things within humans, which means that you should always have the option to turn that off if, and this is big if, you actually do have something that is involves a lot of motion on your website.
Yeah, because I mean, some transitions and animations are necessary to convey
Yeah.
interaction. It can feel, brutally harsh if you don't have any transitions or motions on your web designs or digital designs generally. But there's sometimes stuff that could definitely be reduced or eliminated. And I think actually the examples in the article for these ones are pretty good. Because there's two videos with default motion and then one showing reduced motion.
Yeah.
And at first, I kind of thought, well, is it just slower? I didn't really pick up on the difference between the two. And then I kind of thought, well, I'm missing something. And then I played it back again, and I realised that one of the biggest differences is that there's no background motion on the second video. So it's basically it's a couple of words that are animated, and then behind it there's like two colours, green and blue, and this kind of waves across in the background. And in the second one, the background stays stationary.
Exactly.
And I think the animation of the words is a different speed. I'm not completely sure about that, but the result is that I didn't feel the difference between the two consciously.
Right.
Which is interesting in itself. But yeah, clearly the one without the background did use slightly less resources.
Exactly. And I have to say, I personally have a huge problem with the parallax effects, where the background moves at a different speed or it stays static. I don't know how to explain it, but parallax effects websites, I avoid them. And if they actually use the prefers reduced motion CSS media feature, they could actually turn that feature off for people who request it.
Yeah, I had a problem with when they have the full page videos playing behind text. I really can't cope with reading.
Yeah.
It's very difficult for me. So
having said that, exactly as well, perhaps you should consider not doing it at all.
Yeah, but you might have a very strong push within your organisation to actually do these things.
Exactly.
So again, this is down to starting conversations, coming with maybe even doing some guerrilla tactics here, and just designing the both versions. With one with reduced motion and one with full motion from the off. Because it's going to be the most efficient time to do it is when you're doing it rather than going back and doing it. And if you're implementing something now, then the chances of getting it tweaked in a few months down the line or whatever for something which was already considered a fringe activity or an edge case or whatever you want to call it, then you're going to struggle. So I think just do it.
Yeah, that's the one I would actually recommend everyone to get going with. And it also has this 94% support across all the latest versions of the most popular desktop and mobile browsers. So extensive support for that one, actually.
Yep. And I think that is the closest one you can probably say to my request for prefers low emissions. This is the nearest thing that you've got, I reckon.
And let's just end on the last one, the prefers reduced data. I was not aware that this existed, so I thought this was fascinating. So people can actually say they prefer reduced data, and I know there are lots of countries where this would actually make sense because you pay a lot for data usage. So it's not just about the environment; it's actually also about the financial health of the person using your website. And this is an interesting one because then what would you do? It's still an experimental one. So Carie actually says that it's perhaps not one that you would want to use straight away, but you'd want to try and experiment with it. And actually would be part of the conversations that we encouraged with the first article as well. If a person prefers reduced data, what would we do? Would we hide the header image, the featured image at the top of the website? Mm-hmm. That would be a very common way, I think, to actually approach this.
Yeah. Yeah, show something, an alternate version that was more efficient, or not do the video.
Exactly.
So they kind of like some of these options do overlap and do kind of interlink with each other, which is fine. I mean, because that is then you get the set of choices that this human has made and communicated to you, so you can deliver something better to them.
Yeah. So it's all this is truly fascinating for me. There's so many options available to you now to impact the user experience, which means that you should keep track of these. Some are you can implement now. Some you just need to be aware of. Some need to be just part of conversations around how are we designing our websites based on our knowledge that people need these things sometimes, and we could actually design that in from the get-go instead.
Recommended listening. I think what you could do, given that we talked a bit about images now, and we're talking about efficiency when it comes to carbon emissions and the preferences and so on, I reckon going back and listening to episode 283, which was Core Web Vitals with Katie Hempinius. That might
Good
be a
one.
useful one to listen to, because I know that we definitely talk about image formats there and how supported they are.
Well remembered, James.
Thank you.
And if you want James and myself as part of your next conference, event, or in-house training, we are offering workshops, talks, and courses to inspire and help you grow as individuals, teams, and organizations. Get in touch by emailing hey@uxpodcast.com. Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side.
So, James, do you know why I don't use beef stew as my computer password?
No, Per, I have no idea why you don't use beef stew as your computer password.
It's not stroganoff.
Oh.
I just thought that was amazing. It's not stroganoff.